Western Europe, which likes to pride itself on being the cradle of democracy, would be not just itself a despotism, but would be the cause of despotism in others if it hadn't been bombed to rubble and started all over again by the force of British and American power. There would be no such thing as the United Nations if it weren't for a coalition of the willing that said you can't join the United Nations unless you've declared war on European fascism. And the same would apply to Japan and to many other places. So I'm afraid to say that democracy and export are to be mentioned always in the same breath, because that's the breath that they occur in. My opinion, if you want to hear it about Iraq, is more or less congruent. Coexistence with totalitarian, expansionist, aggressive ideologies in state form isn't possible, which I'm glad is the case, because I don't think it's desirable. It's only a matter of who picks the time of the confrontation. I thought it was nice that just for once, Saddam did not pick the time of the confrontation this time. And the knock-on effects of this in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Libya, and elsewhere, and I hope soon in Iran, have already been very considerable. The implanting of the democratic idea by shock therapy. We might wish it otherwise, but we would only be wishing.
Thank you.
Sure. There's a...
I'm moved to ask you about Orwell's Lesson for Our Times, but I also need to ask you about Hillary Clinton's possibilities in the next presidential cycle, and so I'm just wondering if you could construct an answer that would address both of those.
Look first upon this picture and on this. You remember how Hamlet says? Look first upon this picture and on this, Hyperion to a satyr. So we go from the sacred to the profane. Actually, there's nothing sacred about George Orwell. George Orwell is simply a very good example of what intellectual honesty can do, intellectual integrity can do in the hands of one unaided person who never had a steady publisher, a steady job, a steady place to live, was always ill, was always poor, was always censored, but who managed to outlive and to diagnose correctly the three main problems of his time, which were Stalinism and fascism and imperialism. And so that's an imperishable example. People sometimes say, well, what would he have said about Iraq, for example? And I say, I don't know, because he died when he was 46 and would have been 100 a couple of years ago. So there's no point in doing that. I'd love to, but I can't. I can tell you what he was said about Vietnam, because I know what he thought about European colonialism in Asia, and I've read it, and I've looked it up, and it's very clear to me that he would have been against the Vietnam War. The neoconservatives say he would have been with them. On Indochina, he wouldn't. I can be pretty confident on the as if in that case. By the way, if I'm allowed a parenthesis, I was at a seminar on biography at the Smithsonian the other day. I was invited to be a participant, and one of the many distinguished people who were there, more senior than myself, Michael Corder, who's just done an excellent book on President Grant, General Grant, in the same series, said, you mustn't ever write a biography in which you say, at this point he or she must have thought, or must have felt, or must have. You're not entitled. And you'll lose your integrity as a biographer, and you can't know it, and you shouldn't do it. And I thought, how right that is. I've nodded at that so many times. But, having just written about Thomas Jefferson, I don't completely agree with this anymore. Because I don't know anything about anything if I don't know what Thomas Jefferson thought and felt when he first saw Sally Hemings in Paris. I know exactly what he thought. I'm not a male or a mammal if I don't know what he thought. What he thought was, maybe for the first and only time in his life, man, there is a God. So no rules are iron, but this one is fairly inflexible. As for Mrs. Clinton, look, after all she's done for us and all she's suffered on our behalf, she feels she's owed the presidency. And, who could possibly disagree? Her life is meaningless if she doesn't get at least a shot. And one can only sympathize. Unless you think, as I do, that people should be distrusted who are running for therapeutic reasons. Because the presidency doesn't calm those demons, as her husband has already proved. Amply. But look, the reason why we have to think about it, and the reason why your question is a good one, is this. What else can the Democrats do? And if that's the case, what the hell shape are we in? It would be invidious if I pointed to questioners, I think, because...
You point to whomever you wish, Chris.
well, how do you know I haven't seeded the room with members of my immediate family?
Of your family. That's what you said at the Virginia story, yes. No, but he's not a member of your family. This chap right here.
Sir?
How has your perceived ideological shift affected your social life?
I was asked how my perceived ideological shift had affected my social life. Not much, because I have very few friends, only acquaintances. I've got very little to lose. I don't like most people. I find most people boring. It's easy to turn one's back. I'm a cold fish. And when it comes to matters of life and death and of principle, I find it very easy indeed to quarrel with people. So I don't ask what they think of me. I sometimes wonder what, if they ask themselves what I think of them. But I'm at pains to tell them, to dissolve any doubt. So I sometimes wish I had a large family to fall back on. But I was never much of a family values person. So it's really very nice of people like Dennis to invite me out every now and then, so I can meet new people and socialize. I said the other day, in answer to a question not unlike this, I said, look, I don't want to be loved. And I suddenly thought, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever said. I terribly want to be loved. I need to be loved. But I don't need to be liked. I don't need to be popular. If you see what I mean. Go for the gold standard while you're at it as well.
Do justice and let the skies fall.
Ruat Kailam. Yeah.
Yes.
What have you done to your women in this town? Is it going to be all chaps all the time? What have you done to them? Ah, suddenly the chicks. Well, okay. I was too shy to look.
Western Europe. What is the future of Western Europe? Germany, France, Sweden?
It's too broad a question, ma'am, if you don't mind my saying so. I was asked by the lady, what about the future of Western Europe? Could you not put a more Rem, Aku, Tetagisti, we're all breaking into ancient languages this
yes,
evening.
yes, right.
Put a bit more of a needle into that, perhaps. Not just for my sake. Because a boring question can get a boring answer.
The future of socialism over there, it seems that they're not going to be able to afford their government. They're not going to be able to sustain their way of living. And it seems that some of the people in our government are thinking that that is a good way to do things and would request more of the workers of the United States to pay more to the people that don't work quite so much. And,
yes. If I can condense the question a bit, the lady inquires whether or not, in effect, the Europeans are paying themselves more than they earn and have got too used to a higher standard of living that doesn't quite justify itself. Well, the big difference, I think, between this will be very general, but between the American and the European model is this, that the United States continues to attract quite skilled labor from all over the world. We get the best, often, from places like Vietnam and Korea, Philippines and so forth, and indeed from countries to the immediate south of here. With Europe, which has a continuous need for more labor, they come up against skilled, very entrenched craft unions who don't really want new proletarians on the scene who might outbid them. So it's not a matter of the employers, it's much more a matter of the unions and what they've become used to with long holidays, a lot of welfare and so forth. Which means, to answer your question about socialism, that the socialist movement is dead by definition because it's rich workers disliking poor ones. That's not exactly proletarian internationalism. The second thing is that most of the immigrants from Western Europe, who want to make up this deficit, come at the moment from Muslim countries. And everybody knows that there's a possible trapdoor underneath that apparent free gift of cheap labor. And I don't think I need to state it any more dramatically than that.